So, right at time, welcome back. A very good afternoon to one and all present over here. So, we are right at 3 p.m. Welcome to the day 3 of session 3 with the FDP program on Leadership Gen Next, Exerting Influence, Not Authority. So, in the morning session, we had with us Professor Ashok sir, who take you through that how leadership journey can be applied with the level of academic alliance, and what are the procedures through which an institution, or for that matter, a figurehead of an institution, be it a faculty, be it an admin, can leverage the scope of building up academic alliances. In the session 2, we had with us Professor Sunil Kumar Sarangi from XLRI Jamshedpur, who very vividly gave us through the nuances of different facets of leadership exerting influence. And now, in the third session, we have with us a very, very eminent professor in economics as well as in constitution, Dr. Professor S.N. Mishra, who is right now the Dean of KIT School of Management, KIT University. Professor S.N. Mishra has a PhD in the area of economics on the theme Challenges Before Self-Reliance in Critical Defense Technology. He was in the Indian Economic Service from the year 1976 to 79, where he did his cost-benefit analysis of World Bank projects and handled International Development Agency DEX. He was an officer in the Indian Defense Account Service, where he served as a Director of Finance with DRDO, Financial Advisor and Joint Secretary to the Indian Air Force and JS Aerospace. He authored the Defense Procurement Manual 2005, drawing encomiums from the Prime Minister's office. Post-retirement, he teaches economics and contributes handsomely to prestigious research journals, and he has more than 150 publications to his credit in various reputed national as well as international journals. And he is a regular writer of Orissa Post. Many of you might be coming across through the post which he is regularly putting up its thoughts based on the current economic affairs. I am grateful to you, Professor Mishra sir. Thank you. And since in this 5-day FDP program, as we received a lot of resources, Dean sir was really kind enough to spare a few minutes and share the session with me. Thank you so much, sir, for this honor. So over to you, Professor S.N. Mishra, sir. Thank you here.
Good afternoon, friends. Thank you, Professor Sikta, for giving me this opportunity to interact with such a wide galaxy of academicians from all over the country to share my thoughts on transformational leadership. At the outset, let me mention that I am not an HR professional, and all that I would be talking to you would be based on my long experience in the government, about 36 years, and subsequently as a teacher in the KIT University. Can you all hear me, friends?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Can you all hear me?
You are audible, sir.
So I intend to have 5 different facets to the particular interaction that I'm going to have. Initially, I would dwell on impact of ideology on leadership. This is something which possibly could be new to all of you. And in the second module, I'll cover transformation of India after 1991 due to a change of ideology. Then I would cover about the transformational leadership of Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, with whom I had the good fortune of working for about 4 years as his Director of Finance. And in the fourth module, we'll just have a glimpse of the greatest political leader of 20th century and his leadership quality. And finally, I'll have a few thoughts for my young academic leaders. This is how I intend to go about this. So friends, let me start by saying that leadership in any country globally is a function of the ideology. Every leader has a certain ideology which impacts very, very seriously on how the socio-economic political contours of the country will pan out. So keeping this in mind, I have put together the thought process of 5 great economists, political scientists before you. The first thought process is by the Scottish economist Adam Smith. He wrote a wonderful book, a magnum opus, in 1776. Now, as per Adam Smith, the market forces, as if by an invisible hand, will promote welfare of all. He was the greatest advocate of free market, where buyers and suppliers are completely by free will. And this is also the genesis of what we call as classical economics. And when Ronald Reagan became the president of the United States, he was a practitioner of such basic principle, and in fact used to say that the least governed are the best governed. He also made a very interesting statement that government is the problem and not the solution. So therefore, one can clearly see that Ronald Reagan believed that least government interference, freeing the market, is the best way forward for the country. Then we have Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto and subsequently Das Kapital in 1876. Now, for him, capitalism is basically very exploitative. And therefore, he believed that if you want to bring in justice, equity to the society, you need to dismantle capitalism and you need to have communism, where each one would have as per need, and there would be no difference in the class structure. And this is what he said: capitalism contains the seeds of its own destruction. He believed that because it is an exploitative system, it will ultimately get destroyed and will usher in the utopian socialist state. And also, as all of you would remember, that in 1917, when Russia became USSR became a state, it was Vladimir Lenin who essentially implemented what the great leftist philosopher Karl Marx believed in. And from 1917 till almost 1990, 1/3 of the world believed in the left ideology. So therefore, the basic conflict between US and USSR was based on this principle, this ideological principle. One believed in free market, the other the power of the state to bring in, to usher in equity. Then we had a wonderful economist. His name was Robert Solow. In 1956, he made a very interesting statement. He said that a rising tide will lift all the boats. Basically, what Solow was trying to indicate, that if you are in a position to improve your GDP growth, everybody is going to benefit from this. And it was Margaret Thatcher in UK. She very, very strongly believed that if UK privatizes all the public sector undertakings like coal, like railways, she believed that it is going to help all classes of the society. Then comes a very, very important figure in political democracy. His name was Francis Fukuyama. And Fukuyama, who teaches in Harvard, he was commenting on the fall of the Berlin Wall. As all of you would be knowing, that in 1990, the wall between East and West Berlin was broken, and East and West Germany became a unified Germany again. And also there was a great disintegration of USSR by 1991. And all of you know Glasnost, Perestroika, all this that came up in USSR and disintegrated USSR. So therefore, Francis Fukuyama, in a wonderful book called End of History, End Point of History, so he said that liberal democracy has now the end point of history. He believed rather that this is an end to the conflict between capitalism and socialism. So now it is liberal democracy which is going to have wide acceptance, and it would be the ideology of all the countries. And Merkel, chancellor in Germany, most of the Scandinavian countries like Sweden, Finland, all of them very, very strongly believe that liberal democracy along with free market is the best ideology to pursue forward. And finally, we have the Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz, who believed that this is a very interesting statement that he made after he got the Nobel Prize. He said that a fast rising tide followed by a storm will dash weak boats on the shore and smash them into smithereens. So he believes that that all the boats will not rise when you have growth, unless the state defends the weak, the state protects the weak. So and therefore he is a great advocate of welfare state, where the state takes a very, very important role in ensuring inclusive justice. And Brazil, the president of Brazil, Lula, was there for almost 8 years as the president. He was the person who very, very strongly believed in this ideology, and his leadership was guided by this dictum. In India, in 1991, I had the good fortune of seeing these three very, very important leaders. Now, Narasimha Rao, then Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, and Manteksingh Ahluwalia was the finance secretary. And this troika is responsible for the great shift in the economic ideology of India. India embraced the idea of socialism from 1947 till 1990, but it was under the political stewardship of P.V. Narasimha Rao. India also embraced free market economy, and the finance minister who implemented those ideas was Dr. Manmohan Singh. And the draft of economic liberalization, the main draft, was written by Dr. Manteksingh Ahluwalia, who happened to be my first boss in the North Block. Now, what has happened because of that, the change of ideology, and how has leadership in 1991 impacted on this? Now, as you would see, friends, that India was looking at a growth rate of just about 3.5%. This is what is known as Hindu rate of growth. Raj Krishna, my professor in agriculture, used to mention that between 1950 to 1989, almost 5 decades, India, 4 decades. So India was stuck with socialism. So this is what he used to say: Fabian socialism, bank nationalization, coal nationalization, top-down planning through the Planning Commission, and most importantly, the public sector undertakings were considered as temples of modern India. But this is how Dr. Manmohan Singh in the parliament in July 1991, he made this mention that no force on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. So basically, what Dr. Manmohan Singh said, that with the fall of the Berlin Wall and disintegration of USSR, free market is going to be the toast of a country's basic policy. And this is how you'll see India has done because of change in ideology, change in leadership. And as you'll see from this table, you'll find that agriculture, which accounted for close to 38%, is now around 17%. You can see the farmers' strike, which is going on, and the agrarian sector is the most distressed section in the society. Industry has remained very stagnant. From it was around 26% it was contributing, it's now contributing about 26%. Services has been the flagship, and you can see very clearly that during the pandemic, the sector that was most affected was the service sector. And but between 89 and 2019, you can see that services as a sector has made a dramatic contribution to the GDP. You also would see that export and import has gone up almost 4 times compared to the pre-1990 situation. Foreign direct investment, foreign institutional investment has also zoomed up by almost 3 times. Very, very important, the private sector investment has really gone up, and the growth, GDP annual growth, has also gone up by almost 2 times. So therefore, what has happened due to a change of leadership and change of economic ideology, that today India is dominated by the private sector. It is globally connected. The role of government is no longer that of a controller, but as a facilitator, how it would abet the process of better private sector investment. And we have also to contend with the fact that industry is stagnant, service sector is doing well, agriculture remains quite vulnerable. Now, this is something very interesting, as you would see, that while we have done very, very well in terms of growth, we might not have done as well as China, but in absolute terms, you'll find savings has doubled, export as percentage of GDP has doubled, growth has doubled. But whereas in the human development dimension, you'll see that our progress has not been particularly impressive. You'll see infant mortality rate remains quite high. Maternal mortality rate remains very, very high. Mean years of schooling is just about 4.4, whereas most developed countries it is around 12 plus. Malnutrition remains a very, very serious problem. 46% of children still suffer from malnutrition. And this is something also very interesting. All of you must have a look. This is the World Inequality Report, which very clearly shows that the bottom 50%, friends, who accounted for almost 20% of India's GDP, are down to 15% between 1951 and now. It's down to 15%. The middle class, all of us, who accounted for close to 43-44%, are down to 30%. So contrary to the popular opinion or popular perception that the middle class is doing well, that's not the case. The middle class is, its share in the total national income has really been affected. The class that the 10% top class income category, which was accounting for close to 37% of the income, are today having about 55% of the total income. So that very, very clearly shows that apart from poor human development in education, in health, in terms of nutrition, inequality has become a very, very serious problem in India after economic liberalization. So having said this, let me come down to the major thrust of my lecture, which would be on transformational leadership. And as I said right in the beginning, I'll share quite a few interesting nuggets with all of you about my experience of transformational leadership as I watched Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam do many things for India. India as a proud country in various technology applications. Now, as all of you know, I don't want to be very theoretical on this. Now, there are two types of leadership. One is clearly transactional, where you remain within rules, you promote stability rather than change, you focus on the present and not the future. Whereas in a transformational leadership, you would like to make a significant change in organization. You have a vision where you share values and you try to build relationships, and you try to promote significant change in both the followers and the organizers. This is by and large the distinction between the two. One is a very status quo model, self-interest, follower-leader relationship, whereas in the other one, it is basically meeting the psychological needs of self-esteem, group interest, desired vision, and develop followers to leaders. So now let's get into what a transformational leader can do. And there are several lessons I think all of you can draw from this. Most of you would have read what Kalam had written, his Ignited Mind. All these books are available to all of us. But what I would be telling you, friends, in the course of the next half an hour are some of the interesting nuggets that I had the good fortune of seeing at very, very close quarters. Now, on his table, this was the plaque which he had kept, which read like this: an ignited mind is more powerful than anything on the earth, under the earth, and over the earth. So one day I asked him that, sir, what do you mean by this in the context of your organization? So he said, I'm building this Prithvi missile, ground to air missile, Prithvi missiles. I'm building Agni, which is an intercontinental ballistic missile. Now, these are making me powerful on the ground. Okay. Now, I'm also building what is known as advanced technology vessel. This is a nuclear tipped submarine, which India has successfully built. So a nuclear submarine underwater, missiles on the ground, and over the earth would be the light combat aircraft. India almost depended fully for its fighter aircraft. He says, my vision is that we should have a light combat aircraft, and we don't have to really go for imports in our fighter aircrafts. And I was very, very happy to see that yesterday the government has approved purchase of 83 light combat aircrafts. There has been a lot of delays in that particular program, but one can very, very clearly see that the dream of Dr. Kalam, that we should be more powerful even over the earth, has been substantially realized. Now, what are the unique lessons in Kalam's leadership? So I have basically underlined about 6 very interesting facets of his leadership. Now, so let's go into the first one. Now, he very strongly believed that that most of us are capable of doing extremely good results, and he never believed that most of the Indians are mediocre. So, in a meeting which was taken by George Fernandes, so he shared these thoughts in which I was present. So he said, because this meeting was taken to find out why most of the Indian students, best Indian students, were going abroad, and why the scientific programs in India were not doing well. So Kalam said that I passed out from a private engineering college, which is the Madras Institute of Technology, which is a private university, and he got a second class. He said, I failed to become a fighter pilot. He was very, very keen to become a fighter pilot, and he failed to become that. He said, I designed a small hovercraft which never took off. He didn't join the DRDO as a scientist, but as a non-gazetted scientific officer. And when he was doing that in Bangalore, this hovercraft is still there. So he said, I designed a small hovercraft which never took off. Then the interesting thing is that he never got a PhD. He doesn't have a single scientific article to his credit. He said, I'm an honorary PhD. And he said, when I was in the space organization, the Rohini satellite, which I had designed, had failed in the orbit. So by all counts, somebody can say that I'm a failure. I'm a mediocre guy. But as all of you would know, that people call me as the missile man and the institutional builder. He made a very interesting statement when he was talking, when he was explaining his viewpoints. He made a very, very interesting point. He said there are no mediocre people, there are only mediocre leaders. So, which is very, very important. He very, very strongly believed that nobody, he said geniuses are few and far between. So most of us have the same kind of intellectual capability. It is basically the failure of leadership that we are not able to convert the so-called mediocre people to become really successful in public life. The other thought he was very, very keen to share with all of us as a leader. So he used to say that, when in 1998, India went for the nuclear option, the Pokhran blast. So the United States government, issued sanction against light combat aircraft. I was the director of finance at that time, and the sanction by the US company was, we are trying to build a flight control system. That flight control system we are designing along with the Americans' help. And the company, which is MMOC, it reneged from the contract. I went to US at that time, and the United States government was very, very rigid on this. He said, no, we are not going to honor this contract. So because of that, many people talk about India's long delay in doing the light combat aircraft. So one of the major reasons was that the flight control system, which was to be done significantly with the US help, didn't come through because they reneged from the contract. So I distinctly remember in 97, he called for a meeting of the best Indian scientists globally. And he told them that, this is the time we must try to convert this crisis into an opportunity. And true to his, drive as a leader, he could get some of the best national and global talent to work on the flight control system. The academia, the industry, the ADA, the HL, they were all pulled together. And though it took a little while for us to design the flight control system, today LCA is considered to be one of the best aircrafts which has been produced and designed by any country. So that's really, so basically what essentially he's trying to say, that failure, we should never be wary of failure. What is really required is, build our success during this COVID times. Many innovative things are being done, and many speakers have mentioned about this, that because this crisis, we are all into a different mode of teaching, different mode of connecting to each other. And LCA is one of the most wonderful examples how the crisis that the country faced in terms of building an aircraft, having a wonderful aircraft, has been subsequently realized. So he also used to say that technology is power. This is very, very important. And so he used to say that either you buy a thing, you purchase, say for instance, you could buy Sukhoi 30, but you can buy and take technology and make an aircraft like a MiG aircraft. And the third, of course, is Make in India. So he was very, very proud of indigenous technology, and both Agni, Prithvi, Brahmas, the cruise missiles. He believed that these are the ones which is going to give us enormous power, global power, and people will respect power if you have the right indigenous technology at your command. So, so therefore, he very strongly believed that the true meaning of Make in India will happen only when we are able to design indigenously and then produce them, rather than buy, design, and produce things like T-72, Sukhoi 30. So there are two ways. One is you get a design from a foreign country, you have a license agreement, or you develop the design within the country. So this is the difference used to make, that one is a know-how, the other is know why. When you are designing yourself, you know why this has happened. And he was also a very, very great promoter of self-reliance, because we were part of a committee and we found that India's self-reliance index in the defense technology was only 30%. So he said that we should try to increase it to about 70% in the next 10 years. And he also very strongly believed that value addition is more important than assembling a product. Getting subsystems and assembling them, that's the easier part. But if you are doing it yourself, manufacturing, designing yourself, that is the key to Make in India. And very, very interestingly, even somebody like Kalam, this is something which is something I wanted to share with you, that he developed an indigenous stent. He used to find that the stents which we used to use for our heart surgery were very, very high, prohibitively high. That's around 70, 80,000. And then he did an indigenous research, and they came up with a stent which was costing just about 15% of the imported cost. Very, very cheap. So the import lobby was against him. And when he was scientific advisor, there was something in the paper we said, Kalam's a stunt, not a stent. Even great minds like Kalam, you'll find that you will never be free from criticism, because if you have vested interest around you. So this is how he said that we must go from 0.3 to 0.7. So these are some of the technologies that he talked of. Stealth technology, where your aircraft cannot be captured by radar. Then you have active electronically scanned radar. This has the potential to move 360 degrees. These are the technologies in which India is still not self-reliant. He said we must develop this focal plane array. These are the advanced electronics that we must do that. So he also mentioned, he also initiated what I consider a very novel concept of project management. All of you are academics. You must see the approach, very refreshing approach. Now, what he said, that anything which is approved by the cabinet committee on major programs like missile program, electronic warfare programs. So he said, if you have a program, then you have empowered committees at the apex and also at program level, and all stakeholders, including finance, should be part of the committee. So this was a very, very major change from typical government working, where files will move up, it will go to the finance ministry, it will go to the law ministry. So he said, nothing doing. Now, if you are going to do a major program, then you have to pull together people from all facets, all stakeholders, and they should take quick decision. And because of this particular program management structure, decision making was faster, and people had a feeling of ownership. Everybody felt that he was part of the program. And the role of finance, instead of being a critic, became one of facilitator. You work as part of the group. You don't feel by raising an objection, you do not feel happy. If you are part of a group, then you have to come up with innovative suggestions and mid-course corrections. So this was a very, very major contribution of Dr. Kalam as a leader, which is not adequately discussed. There was something also about him which is very, very endearing. Friends, you must remember that Kalam as a scientist is not so loved as Kalam the human being. I'd like to mention a few interesting facets of him. Now, he used to have a Saturday meeting where anybody can meet him without a prior appointment to vent his remarks. And I used to meet these people during this Saturday meeting. And most of the people who used to meet him were essentially from the Group D level, peons, chowkidars, people who are hard of clerks who have been done down in terms of various disabilities. So they used to come. So whenever they used to come, he will ask them to sit down, and they used to hesitate very badly. But he would insist that they sit down, and then he will ensure that they get either tea or coffee. So one day I told him that, sir, you should contest the elections because you are a real populist. So he smiled. He said, no, I am not a populist. I said, he said that, whether it is a clerk or a scientist, he comes as a person with a grievance, and he or she has the same right over tea and over my courtesy as anybody else. So therefore, this is what I call as socialism in tea. And this is something which I distinctly remember, how he endeared himself to all classes of people by just being courteous with them. I believe when he went to Rashtrapati Bhavan, he ensured that all the Group B quarters, the servant quarters, the quarters in which the supporting staff lives, were completely changed. And he used to share with me that the reception that he got when he left the Rashtrapati Bhavan was the best from these supporting staff. They were visibly weeping because they never had seen a president who had devoted so much of time in improving their quality of construction, their quality of quarters, providing IT facility to the children, having community hall, all these things were there. He was extremely caring to the personal staff. I remember once I asked his peon, he said, how is he? He said, sir, he is God. He is God. So I said, why? Why do you say this? He said he takes his lunch from canteen, gets a lunch from canteen, and he would never allow the staff, his peon, to clean the plates. He'll clean himself and wipe it dry and keep it outside. So one day he asked the peon, said, yes, sir, please allow me to do that. So he said that no, my mother had told me that when it comes to your used utensils or your undergarments, please do not give it to anybody else. Do it yourself. I have seen it even when he became the president of India. He ensured that he washes his own clothes, and if it is not a formal dinner with others, he would clean his own plates. And I don't think I have seen a leader who reached out to the disadvantaged section as much as Kalam did. My respect for him is more as a human being than as a scientist. I'll just relate one incident to all of you. I was working in Pune when he came to Pune, and he was visiting the labs in Pune. And he had a particular driver who used to come and take him around the city, Bhosle. So when he came, he found that Bhosle wasn't there. So he asked the director, what happened to this person? And they were very hesitant. So finally, he came to know that Bhosle met with an accident and he is at home. So Kalam went to his house, met him, and asked him whether he could do anything for him. So he said, okay, sir, after I had multiple fracture, I went to a private hospital, and they didn't reimburse the entire amount, so I had to rough out close to 20,000 more, which was not cleared by the audit department, which I was heading. So Kalam ensured, because he had the powers to waive such requirements when there is a genuine case, and he ensured that the balance amount is paid out of the DRDO budget as a discretionary grant. And so that is something which is very, very unique, that I don't remember any person at his level who had this kind of concern for poor people. And the final very interesting thing is when I was going, I'd gone to the US. So suddenly the guy who was driving the sofa asked me whether I know Dr. Kalam. So I told him that yes, he was my boss. And he said, I had the good fortune of driving him. So I said, what happened? What was your experience? So he said, after he got into the car, he asked me that how many children I have. So I said, one is doing medicine, one is doing engineering. So he presented a book to me, and then after the lecture, when he came back and got into the car, so I was waiting outside for him, and then I found that all the students had come out and they were waving at him. So I told him, I said, sir, I feel very proud of you that because though we are blacks, these white people are respectful towards you. Otherwise, they could be very, very snobbish. They treat us very, very savagely. So I felt very proud that because you are knowledgeable, you are a president with knowledge, therefore they're respecting you. So the story doesn't end there, friends. So before Kalam got out of the car, he gave him a packet. So he said, take this and don't open it, give it to your children when you go back home. So he said, when I went home, I found that there were two $500 notes. So I thought that possibly he has made a mistake. So I went back to the hotel, and then he smiled. He said, no, this was the honorarium that I got for my lecture. And so I'll be very happy if you can use it for your children. And this chauffeur told me that I wrote this as a piece in the Statesman. And the chauffeur told me that, kindly tell Dr. Kalam that my children, they have passed out and they have not spent that money. And whenever they see their white friends who are whites, they would say that this is a gift from the Indian president. So I don't think I have met anyone. I've worked with Dr. Pranab Mukherjee, with Mr. Anthony, Mr. Fernandez, very, very close. They're very nice people. But these kind of concern for very, very poor people, disadvantaged people at very, very close quarters, I don't think I have come across any leader who had this kind of an attitude for such people of disadvantaged category. There are some very interesting characteristic about Dr. Kalam. I thought I'll share with you. Kalam used to, during Delhi's winters were very, very severe. So he used to wear a jacket. And I used to find that this jacket, had patches all over. It was a nice woolen jacket. So, but it had patches all over. So when he was getting Bharat Ratna in 1997, so I told him, I was very close to him. So I told him, sir, it is time to change this jacket. Please buy a new jacket. So he just smiled. He said, no, I'm not going to discard this jacket. So I said, what is the story of this jacket? So he said, when I joined as a young scientist with Vikram Sarabhai in the ISRO program, so I was going to the US. And so Sarabhai asked me, do you have enough woolens to survive winter of US? So he said, yes, sir, I have a sweater. So he said, don't worry, I'll give you a nice woolen jacket. So please take that. I think it will fit you. So Kalam said that, he gave him one. And when he, again, after the US trip, he got it dry cleaned and gave it to Vikram Sarabhai. Sarabhai said that, please keep this jacket. This is my gift to you. And Kalam told me that whenever I wear that jacket, and the warmth of my boss, my leader, is always on me. And I know that even if he's in heaven, he is blessing me. So I believe that even as the president also subsequently, he was very, very fond of this frayed jacket. And he always made it a point to wear this. The second thing I thought I'll just share with you is that this was very exceptional. I have seen many top leaders, but very few of them will defend the team members when they are being grilled at the highest level. So I remember once there was a public accounts committee, and some of these scientists were criticized by the public accounts committee. So he said, no, these people are not going to appear before the PSC. I am going to appear. And he told Indrajit Gupta, who was the chairman of the PSC, that that there is no irregularity committed by my team members, And I am not going to accept any of these things that you have written, because if there is some deviation, this is not because of corruption, but because of a genuine mistake. So he defended them, and he just didn't agree that some action should be taken against the junior members. I haven't seen any top person, if they are being grilled at the highest level, who would support the team members like this. He could be very firm with the Prime Minister. I remember he had gone for a presentation to Mr. Devagowda, who was the Prime Minister. And as he started his presentation, the Prime Minister, that it was his habit to started, dozing from left to right. And so Kalam told him, I said, Mr. Prime Minister, you seem to be very tired. But this is too serious a business to be heard by the Prime Minister when he's not fully awake. And so after that, Devagowda never slept. And when we are coming back, I said, sir, you are really gutsy. He said, no, you should always be firm at any level. If you find that somebody is not listening to you, you should never hesitate to mention this to the other person, that yes, that he is not paying adequate attention to what you do. There's another very interesting thing. Kalam had this wonderful habit of asking everybody for nice cuttings every day. He encouraged people to send interesting reading material to him. And one day, my son, sent him a cutting through me, which is about the Ridley turtle. So the articles showed that in Chandipur, where they were doing the missile testing, many of this rare variety of Ridley turtles were getting killed. So, so my son sent this article to him, saying that why is he destroying the rare Ridley turtle? So, so normally Kalam used to return all these articles with remarks the very next day. But this particular article he returned almost after 15 days. And there was a very interesting note to that article. So he said, my dear son, I agree with all your concerns. We cannot fully stop the missile testing, but we have found out that during the breeding season, most of the Ridley turtles are getting killed. So we have decided not to hold missile testing during the breeding season. And so this was my son had sent in '98, and I had the good fortune of taking my son to him. So when I said, sir, he is my son, he immediately said, oh, he is the Ridley turtle guy. So just remember, his memory, 98, the small piece, and he remembered that, yes, this was the guy who talked about the vanishing tribe of Ridley turtle. His stamina for work was absolutely incredible. It is not possible to think of somebody like him who could work about 17, 18 hours, which included Sundays also. He used to go for LCA review. All of us will get tired, but he used to had all the energy to be working for almost 14 to 15 hours every day. And this is a personal story I thought I'll just share with you. So in 2012, when I did finished my PhD, so I wanted him to write a foreword for my book. So I went and met him in Delhi in 2012. So after I finished talking to him, it was around 2 o'clock. I went to meet General Swaminathan, who was a good friend, and he was staying there. So suddenly I found Dr. Kalam coming to the room. He said, you have not yet left? I said, no, sir, I'll leave in a few minutes. So he just went down and got me carrying a plate with some samosas and some, there was some samosa, there was some badas. So in one plate, very, very hot. So he said, you have some of them. I have asked them to make a cup of coffee. So I was looking at him. Here is a Bharat Ratna. He is an ex-president. He had everything to gain out of me. I had everything to gain out of him, not the other way around. But here is a man, he could bring a plate of samosa to one of his middle-level officers who he was meeting almost after 15 years. I don't think anybody else that I have met in my life, some very, very senior people, would remotely, match up with, and that is how his leadership qualities are really, really thought of. So these are some of the pictures when he came to my office in Bombay. You can see there is a picture of somebody making a painting of a sketch of Dr. Kalam. In our office, there were 400 sketches made by Dr. Kalam, and they wanted to gift him. And this is how he had come, and very wonderful moment for me, 2010. And this is a very interesting picture. Now, can somebody tell me who is the Air Force officer who is saluting? Can somebody tell me who is he? Anybody from the audience? Hello, can you all hear me, friends? Hello? Hello? Can somebody tell me, hello? Can somebody tell me who is this person who is saluting Dr. Kalam's mortal remains?
Sir, is he Arjun Singh?
Marshal of the Air, Arjun Singh. Please give him a big hand.
Marshal
of the Air, Arjun Singh.
Yeah.
Arjun Singh.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Welcome,
This is a one. So I don't know how many of you have seen this photograph. So I was present, when this happened. Now, Marshal of the Air, Arjun Singh, was very, very close to Dr. Kalam. Dr. Kalam used to really revere him. Now, he was completely wheelchair bound for almost 6 months when he got the news that Kalam has died out of heart attack. Okay. So he made it a point to come to pay his respects. And as you can see that he suddenly got up, and you could see that another Air Force officer is holding his hand. So he saluted him, and then he sat down. So he asked him that, sir, how did you get up? So he said that, you don't salute a person like Kalam sitting on the chair. He deserves a salute from me, a proper salute of an Air Force officer. This is the kind of respect that he used to get. I'll take another 5 minutes to share my thoughts on another very, very charismatic president that the world has seen. He is considered to be the greatest politician of the 20th century, as named by the Time magazine. Gandhi was a very close second. Now, he was president of the United States for 4 times, and he was struck by polio. And the greatest thing about Franklin D. Roosevelt, anybody who enters into the White House, whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, please remember, my friends, they would first go to Abraham Lincoln and then to the portrait of Franklin D. Roosevelt. So he took America out of the Great Depression of the 30s by ensuring the New Deal program, generating employment. During his time, 13 million people who are unemployed became employed, and America became a fully employed society. And he also was the architect of Social Security and inclusion. And in 1933, he started something called the Fireside Chats, which Mr. Modi, our Prime Minister, is also doing, called Man Ki Baat. This is based on what Franklin D. Roosevelt used to do in 1933. And whenever he used to do this Fireside Chats, friends, close to 10 million Americans listened to him on the radio. And almost like Ramayana, Mahabharata, when it was being screened on the television, Doordarshan, just as nothing got done in India, everything came to standstill. So similar was his appeal to the people, because he believed very, very strongly, though he was part of a capitalist country, that unless he is welfare oriented, unless he cares for people who have been ravaged by social insecurity, unemployment, health problem, unless he has a inclusive society, he was the person who ensured that 15% of American budget is spent for people who are disadvantaged. So apart from making America a global hegemon, he also ensured that he inked the first script of genuine social inclusion into the script of government. This is another very interesting observation, friends, by Elie Wiesel. Anybody who can say who is this guy, Elie Wiesel? Anybody? Can somebody tell me who the antecedents of this person, Elie Wiesel? Now, Elie Wiesel is a Nobel Prize winner in physics. He lost all his relations in the Holocaust when Hitler, so he was a Jew, he was taken along with other people, his parents, relations, to the Holocaust chamber, and he was the lone survivor of Holocaust, Elie Wiesel. And he rose to become, he became a physics professor, got Nobel Prize in physics. So Bill Clinton called him to speak to his senators in the US, Elie Wiesel, about his experience of the Holocaust and how he has made it into the Nobel Prize. So his speech is considered to be one of the best 10 speeches in the world. There is a wonderful book called Great Speeches of the World, and Elie Wiesel's speech is considered to be one of the greatest speeches, possibly for me the best speech that I can think of. Now when he spoke to the American senators, he said that when a ship carrying him and his parents were passing by US, so these people made a frantic attempt. They sent a message to Franklin D. Roosevelt that, Hitler's ship is going to kill us. He's taking us to the gas chamber. Please help us out. He said, despite so many entreaties by people who are being carried in that ship, Franklin D. Roosevelt did nothing. So he said, because of his indifference, many people, many Jews were mercilessly killed by Hitler. So he made a very interesting statement that when you become indifferent to such great tragedies, you actually become the friend of the enemy. He said Franklin D. Roosevelt never liked Hitler, but by becoming indifferent to the plight of the Jews, he actually became the friend of the enemy. So it's a very, very great lesson that, we should never be indifferent to people who are really down in the dumps. The final two thoughts that I would like to share with you, friends, that for me, leadership is all about integrity. There are the three phases that all these three leaders, I worked with them very, very closely. The first person is Mr. Antony, and I'd like to share a few thoughts on Mr. Antony for about 1 or 2 minutes. When Mr. Antony became the defense minister of Ministry of Defense, so I happen to be a financial advisor. And normally when the defense minister comes, so there are many unreasonable demands by the minister. Apart from the legitimate requirements, most of the defense ministers will make some unreasonable demands. So I was waiting when he came as the defense minister. So he had a huge reputation that he was very, very honest. So I got a call from his office. So I went and met him. So he told me that I should get removed the AC, air conditioner, in his car. I said, sir, is it not functioning or what? So he said, no, I find that if you use an AC, you have to pay 400 rupees. So I said, sir, that is when you are going for a private, when you are taking people or when you are using the car for private purposes. So he said, no, many times my wife also travels in this car. I do not want to use AC and give a false certificate. So ultimately the AC was removed. The second incident I remember of him, that once he went to the hospital, to the Air Force hospital, which was nearby. And the commandant told me that he had some fever or something, and he gave him some medicines. So Anthony became all right. And then he called up the brigadier and told him that what are the cost of the medicines. So the commandant told him, he said, no, sir, I bought it from the market. This was within my powers. I bought it from the market. So he said, no, I'm not entitled to this. This is an armed force hospital. So I'm not entitled to something which you have bought. So he said he sent me in an envelope some 86 rupees stapled. He said, I still carry it, not knowing what to do. So Anthony, for me, is the most honest officer that I can think of, you know. And I remember he came to the library once, our defense library, and he asked the librarian whether he could we could buy a few Malayalam books. So when that lady told him that, you know, it requires clearance by the financial advisor, he came to my room. He said, Mr. Mishra, I want to buy some books. Is there any difficulty to buy a few books for me? Will you kindly approve? Now, I cannot think of any defense minister who will come to a financial advisor with a request to buy a few Malayalam books. So that was Anthony for you. The other person is Dr. Manmohan Singh. And I would like to share with you, friends, that when he was Secretary Economic Affairs, I was a research officer at that time. So he would leave his room exactly at 1:30 and he'll walk down to his house. So one day I asked him that, sir, why don't you use a car? He said, no, it is quite close by and the fuel prices are increasing and it is good for my health. I remember when he was president, you know, his son-in-law, his daughter and son-in-law were living just right opposite us in Delhi. And many times I have seen that he will come to meet his daughter driving his own Maruti 800 car. You know, he and his wife, they will come. So, so in terms of integrity, the standards were unbelievable, absolutely incredible. And Dr. Kalam, I've said so much about his honesty, his leadership quality. And now, as far as honesty is concerned, you know, he, as everybody knows, that he went to the Rashtrapati Bhavan with the 2 suitcases and a veena, and he came out with the same baggage. I remember when we had gone to Russia, and when his TDA bill, you know, went to him, he said, no, I was a state guest, so I cannot claim $75 per day because I was a state guest. So that is that. So another so one of the things that I would like to share with all of you friends, that the leaders really at the top, some of the top leaders have been so financially prudent, financially really above reproach, that they really get respected by everybody. So now with this, this is my last slide to all of you. Now, Professor Saroj Mahapatra did mention about quite a few things, but I thought that let me share my thoughts based on my 45 years of experience, both in the government and also as a teacher. Now, one of the things I find, friends, that the younger generation, you know, like Thomas Friedman said, the world is flat. With the internet coming, you know, what has happened? That depth of knowledge has become the biggest casualty. Most of the people that I meet, not only youngsters, from people from different age groups, educated people, because of the Google Guru and because of the internet surfing, they have a sense, but they have no depth. So this is one of the biggest challenges today, you know, cutting across even the youth. So I think it is very, very important that all of you, you know, if you want to be good leaders, you need to have depth in knowledge. Many times we make certain observations, which is without very deep reading. You know, I remember when we were students, there was a queue in our library to read Time and Newsweek magazine. Time, Newsweek, and Economist. These are the three magazines. There was a queue for that. You can read that for about an hour. So every day. So there was a queue. And today you can put it as an app. And so many times I ask my son that, well, you have this app Economist on your thing, but do you really read it? So what has really happened that with all these things available easily, many times I find that youngsters tend to be very superficial. So they don't read the editorial. So Hindu is that they will not read the editorial. They'll not go into the depth of things. So this is one observation I thought I'll just share with you. The second very important thing I would mention is the importance of courtesy. And again, I'd like to share a very interesting anecdote. This involves Kennedy. You know, this is what Kennedy. This is an anecdote involving Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. So, so after Kennedy became the president, he looked around for an advisor who could tell him who are the best in the business for getting into his cabinet. So he called, so somebody said that you call Mr. Goldwater, Barry Goldwater, who had a lot of knowledge about all these people. So this is a piece which Barry Goldwater wrote, and I thought I'll just share with you. So Barry Goldwater writes that, when I went to the president in the evening, so we had tea. I don't remember what all I discussed with him, but I could really clearly see that he is a man in a hurry. He's a young person. He has a lot of ideas, and he's a man in a hurry. But all that, I don't remember what I discussed or what recommendations I made. But after I finished discussion with him, so he asked me, he said, sir, how have you come? So he said, I am an old man. I don't drive car now. I will hire a taxi, I'll hire a car and go back home. So Kennedy immediately said, sir, please hold on. So then Kennedy called for his personal car and his own personal driver. And he said he came down the flight of stairs in the White House. And he opened the door and said, thank you, sir. That's all I remember, you know, as a retired person, you know, from the US government administration. So this is what Goldwater writes. I think all of it is a great lesson in all this, that when people get retired, people, so many times you are subjected to a lot of ignominy. People do avoid you. So I think please remember that there is no substitute for courtesy. There is absolutely no substitute. I remember when Kalam got his Nobel Prize, got his Bharat Ratna. I was also in the Rashtrapati Bhavan at that time with Abbas. So he was looking here and there, and he was very restless. So then suddenly I found Mrinalini Sarabhai's wife. She came in. She was a little late, and she came in. And I distinctly remember Kalam fell at her feet, touched her feet, and then you know, ensured that she gets a seat in the first row. He said, I can sit behind, but she will definitely sit in the first row. And I have seen it myself. So he used to tell me that Vikram Sarabhai and his wife are like my own parents. And I've seen it in the full view of everybody. I mean, Kalam going prostrate and ensuring that she gets a seat in the first row. The third thing I thought I'll just share with all of you is the importance of interdisciplinary reading. Reading is something which has become a huge casualty. We are essentially news mongers, but I think when it comes to serious reading, wide reading, that has become a huge challenge. So I think please do read, and your reading must not be confined only to your discipline. The fourth thing I like to mention is that you must avoid binary perspective. That means right or wrong. So that kind of, unless you do a detailed study, please do not get into this binary perspective. And that would only happen provided you have facts, you have proper reasoning, and you're also objective. And finally, I personally believe that you may be very successful personally, but unless you really care for the underprivileged, and I mentioned a lot of anecdotes involving Dr. Kalam. So unless we care for the underprivileged, I think all our lessons in leadership would become futile. So these are a few thoughts I thought I'll just share with all of you, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. And I hope all of you gained somewhat out of the rich experience that I have over the last 4 decades. Thank you, friends.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, you have always been, in terms of your presence of intelligence, you have always enlightened us. And our participants today have gained so much. I see chat box full of appreciation.
Thank you.
It's actually, it was a splendid rendition of the great legends which you have taken us through. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. I would request all the participants to have their questions. So now it's open for discussion.
Anything, I'll be very happy to. Yeah.
First of all, Dr. Mishra, sir, thank you so much for such an insightful session, which is so deep and intense. And each and every example that you have illustrated talks about the richness of your heart. You got an exposure to be a part of such great leaders. And today, I think we have been blessed that we have felt the same insight and same feel in you when you were being giving us the lessons of life. It is not easy to imbibe such virtue with just by words. It needs a precision and practice that comes through your voice. The examples that you have illustrated, I think it is the vast and the richest example which Google Baba doesn't have, because these are the enriched experience which had come up with your versatility. I remember that in one of a session when I also got an opportunity to meet this great legend who is not only the diva of the scientific era of India, but also a man of great virtue and great respect. Till his last breath, if we see our President APJ Abul Kalam, he only taught us that work has no substitute.
Absolutely.
And that is the power which I felt today from your session. Your experience and your insight is so valuable. One of the great illustration that you gave today was from the Wilson session, that how he has incorporated a great lesson. So as a business communication faculty, I will also be going to the guidelines that you have provided us.
Thank you.
And on behalf of all my colleagues who are a part of this great community, I want to thank you, sir, for this great insight. And only one question I want to put up, that sometime, we don't get the exposure as you got it, so that your enriched experience with the real legends and your own versatility of it. So how do we get this kind of insight and this kind of experience through reading? Because many times, as we see in the social media today, the writing also sometimes has very different fabrications. So how do we go to the virtual and the correct writing to get the deeper insight of the brains and imbibe those learnings in the next generation?
Ma'am, I would only say that one of the best ways to do it is to read good autobiographies. I just finished the autobiography written by Barack Obama, A Promised Land. Just finished it. Now, one of the anecdotes really struck me as very, very wonderful. So when he walked into the White House, early in the morning, while he was going around the garden, he found the gardener. And he asked him that, sir, how long have you been in the White House? So the gardener told him that I am there for the last 4 decades. And so Obama said that, sir, I would like to shake hands with you. So he said, sir, my hands are a little solid. So, so I'll just wipe it. He said, don't worry, you just shake hands with me. And then Obama said that I have so much to learn from you, sir. He said, why did you say that, sir? He said, for 40 years, the way you have tended the garden, with your freckled face, with your withered hand, I wish I, as the president, can work as hard as you. And so I think tears came to my eyes. He was the one who appointed Ginsburg as the judge, So Ginsburg, when she became a judge in the Supreme Court, she was from very humble origin. She was a Latino, and she called her to White House for a cup of tea. And Ginsburg writes that I told the president that, would you allow my mother to come along with me? So, and she also said that my mother was a house help. She has raised me. And I'll be very, very happy if you allow me to bring her to the White House. So, Kalam said, Obama said, with great pleasure, please do bring her. So he said when his mother came, we had dinner together. So all along I was thinking that if my mother was alive, how happy she should have been. He said, I'm so unlucky that Ginsburg could bring his mother to the White House, but I could show the White House to my own mother. So I think you are absolutely right, ma'am. Today, what is happening, that in the rabble rousing which we find in the social media, there are no role models. I purposely chose Dr. Kalam because I think he is possibly the only person I have found who didn't have any, perceptible vice. I have moved very, very closely with him, and I argued with him. But I was extremely fond of. There was no gap between his personal and the private life. That's something which I want to share with you. That any person who has the dichotomy between what he says and what actually he practices is the most discomforting aspect of my experience in life. So I think, to answer your question, I think wide reading, good reading of autobiographies, I think can be helpful. I do a lot of reading autobiographies, so I find a lot of, like Chaglas Roses in December, he writes that, you should never write about people who are dead. Wonderful. So he says, you should never write about the dead because they are not present to defend themselves. So, so something which is very, very wonderful. Otherwise, you'll see that most of the people speak against Gandhi, or a lot of filth we try to pass off as interesting literature. So never do that. So that is one. I think the other is, I think the moment you think less about yourself and more about others, what you can do for others. I do teach a few tribal children. So I like to share with you, friend, with you, ma'am, that one of them got into the Odisha Administrative Service. So he rang me up. This boy rang me up. So he said, sir, I'm bringing a fish for you, a live fish from you. I said, hey, don't be so stupid. He said, no, sir. I know you are very fond of fish. I could never give you anything, but I must give you this live fish. So I think my day was made. This happened in 2014. So I told my wife that my student is bringing a live fish, and we must partake it with him. So these are the small moments, you savor. And if you are able to do a few things yourself without really, publicizing them, you don't require a publicity mission for all that. People will get to know that you are doing some good work, and that brings a lot of happiness to yourself. I hope I have answered the question.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir, for giving such a deeper insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or? Do you have any other questions from the participants?
Let me have one more. Let me have one more. I mean, at least, you know.
Good afternoon, sir. May I come in, sir?
Please do. Please come.
It was a great honor to hear you, sir, and a privilege to listen to you and all the experience. অনেক ভাল লাগলো, sir. And I was also very much lucky enough to have to experience with Kalam, sir, in one of the science conclave in our university.
Wonderful.
And the same experience I also got, sir. But that was a year back, much year back. But what I see presently, sir, it's not about the leader. It is about I hope you don't mind if I
not
contradict,
at all. Not at all.
with due humbleness, sir.
No, problem.
Sir, it's all about like winner or loser today. From the day when the child enters the school, he is all taught about the he is actually exposed to the competitiveness in oration, in handwriting, into the class. So there the war starts to be, you have to be a winner, and how you have to be a winner, that is no way. So we find that we have a big education industry in Kota going on just because you have to be winner in the society. And then you have to earn lot of money so you have a comfortable life ahead. And that is all what we all are fighting for, I hope. I think because that is the ways children are raised today, or that is what we are seeing today also. In, like, for example, let us say in a college or university, people are fighting. They see that seats are full or not, and if the seats are kept vacant, anyhow they have to be filled up. So the quality goes somewhere. So in the present context, sir, how this sir Kalam effect can be implemented in this winner and loser definition of the society? So that's my question, sir. Thank you very much.
I think it's a very, very real and serious challenge. There is absolutely no doubt about that. I haven't met a single couple in the last decade where their children are either not first or second. Then I keep on thinking the third kon ho raha hai, you know. So whenever you discuss things, so I think on a serious note, today you have many options also, you know, unlike our times. Let me be very honest with you. During the present day, you have very many options, you know, in your educational career. You don't have to really become an engineer or an MBA to do well in society. There are many other avenues which are available where. So I think one of the things that I think we must do is we must try to you know, find out, you know, it is like that wonderful movie Three Idiots, you know. So find out a child's predilection, you know, and do our very best to encourage him or her to do that, instead of you know, very, very clearly charted paths, you know, for them which they may not. So that puts tremendous pressure on them. So well, I think as far as Kalam is concerned, some of the things, I think extreme hard work, you know, as I mentioned, hard work, and also having a scientific spirit, doing something which is your strong point. So the society will not look down upon you. I remember Mussoorie in '78. We had Salim Ali, the ornithologist. So I asked him, I said, sir, why did you go into bird watching? So he said, I did that because, you know, my father found that, you know, I was really good at it, you know, at spotting them. So, so it has to be at multiple level. You know, the family support has to be there, that, you know, you get into area of choice. So I remember my son, when he did his engineering, he really didn't want to become an engineer. He wanted to join the advertising industry. And today he is writing script for Netflix. So he's an engineer. So he's doing what his passions are. But well, these stories are few and far between. But otherwise, what you said, Deepak, is largely true. We are going through difficult times. Opportunities are there. So I think you have to make the most of it, but yes, there is no guarantee that you are successful in the traditional sense, but opportunities are also there. Very, very good opportunities are also there. So it is entirely up to us, how as parents, how as an institution, we bolster those predilections of a child. More than that, I don't think. And I think we are not role models. Most of the teachers, unfortunately, do not become role models. And also the kind of things that you see in Netflix and all, in terms of poor language, violence, and vulgarity, that upsets me in the name of free speech. It upsets me no end. I'm not a prude, but at the same time, the kind of violence, the kind of language which children use on the screen, people have easy access to all this. So that also, I think, Deepak, is a very, very serious problem. I have written a very strong editorial on this, saying that freedom of speech is not a license to be vulgar, So, which is what you see, because on one hand, it is not censored, it is not edited. So you get out with anything, in the name of artistic freedom. I think there's a serious challenge to the fabric of the society. You can't watch a play, cinema, with your family members. You can't, which is what we used to do. So we are going through a serious crisis. Entertainment industry, for instance, they are very happy that viewership is increasing, but at the same time, I think there is a huge challenge on these moral dimensions, and I think they have a very, very big impact with the child. So propaganda, for instance, social media can be very, very destabilizing. So it is entirely up to you as parents how you handle them.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Hello, sir.
Please.
Good evening, sir. This is Manas here.
Yeah.
I had a question on the very first session that we had on the first day. Sir
Okay.
said something very beautiful, which struck a chord in my brain. That was about we have to be sure, we should know it at our heart that the students or the children will never listen to us complete with all the intentions and all the concentration, but they will definitely imitate us.
Yeah.
And that thought is not new. When we read about our own culture, when our own scriptures, we see that in our ancient times, there was in the Gurukul system, it was Acharya system. So
Yeah.
Acharya means a person who teaches by his own examples, by his
Yeah.
own acharan.
Yeah.
So Acharya और गुरु के अंदर वो अंतर होता है. But in today's this digital platform, I feel it difficult to pass on that Acharya system in this system, because in this digital platform, actually on this digital platform, because how we live, how we talk, how we behave around, that is not visible to me as a student from my teachers. It is only the few hours or a few minutes which is being portrayed in front of the system.
Yeah.
Only those parts which you want me to see. If you do not want me to see your hairs, you don't want me to see your legs, you don't let me see. So leave alone what is the etiquette, the culture and all. So how to preserve our own culture, our values, our ethos in this system actually? How I should learn from my gurus without actually physically being in touch with them, without seeing them around, without seeing their acharan, and how do I pass on my etiquettes, my upbringing to the future generation as a teacher?
Manas, I think it's a very serious problem. It's a very serious problem because firstly, in a free society, when you have easy access to the digital platform and other things, so it is very difficult actually to inculcate our traditional values. Very, very difficult, extremely difficult. But I think one of the major things that the parents have to do some kind of, soul searching is how they maintain their life. Now, supposing I am very fond of hard drinks, liquor. Now, if I tell my child to be a teetotaler, he or she would say, no, I'm not going to accept your statement. So wherever children today find that there is a dichotomy between what you say and what you do, today that is becoming a biggest problem. People of my generation, they are not comfortable at all interacting with the youngsters, because youngsters are open books. So we are to blame. We as elders, we are very judgmental. I think that is not going to help us at all. You must be prepared to meet them. But at the same time, what I would like to emphasize is that if as parents or teachers, we want to be listened to, I think we have to also have the kind of quality, the conduct. If we are not doing that, then I think they will not respect you. Like for instance, Sikta, maximum number of management development programs she has done. She has been pursuing it relentlessly. So therefore, the students also find that she doesn't have to advertise it. She doesn't have to put it up in a advertisement that I'm doing this. People will know. So I think what we practice, how we conduct ourselves in the public space is extremely important. And to answer your question on traditional values, some of the traditional values are very, very good, but some of the traditional values also can be very regressive. So treating women in an inferior manner, some of the teachings, that I think is not at all acceptable. Not that every traditional value that you have, is really good. So we have to see globally which are the good value systems. Like for instance, Barack Obama. Once he was flying, and while he was getting down from the aircraft, suddenly it rained, and somebody put up an umbrella for him. So he didn't go away. He waited for the air hostesses to come, be part of the umbrella, and then he went to the airport. So that is why he, more than his diplomatic skills, I think he as a person is so fondly remembered. But for me, what is important is the value system that a youngster, that an elderly, it is not limited to just the youngsters, So I think that is very, very important, very, very important, that you don't have a dual life, that hypocrisy, the youth will completely, debunk it. They will poo-poo at you. वो कहेंगे कि नहीं यार ये तो क्या बात कर रहे हैं आप, बकवास कर रहे हैं आप, समझ गया? So you have to maintain those norms yourself, and so to be respected. Yeah.
Sir, I beg to interrupt you in between, but
Please.
actually, I think I could not present my question in a very
Okay.
articulated way. I
Yeah.
agree that there is no space for hypocrisy in this world right now.
Yeah.
And I do not. I'm a person who believes in preach what you practice, and
Yeah.
do not do things to others that you do not like to be done to yourself. Completely into it.
Yeah.
And those things which I cannot practice, I cannot simply impose on people, और मैं वो मतलब वो ज्ञान देने वाली
जी,
चीज
जी।
मेरे से नहीं होता है. And I believe that I am part of today's youth.
जी.
And I am a student right now, but I have been a faculty at Keith University. I have been around the present generation of students bubbling with energy and with access to everything around them,
जी.
good and bad, right and wrong, and all the gray scales in between.
Yeah.
So my point is exactly whatever. Let's not discuss what are goods and what are the bad culture or bad traditional values of our system. I was talking about how do we pass on that legacy or that good system, that we, whatever good that we think is good, how to pass it on. Like you rightly said, that they have to see us what we are practicing, then only they will respect us.
Yeah.
But my point is they cannot see us doing it in the real life today. They'll be at their home, I'll be at my home, and they'll just meet me for the 40 or 45 minutes or 1 hour or 55 minutes of class. So how to pass it on in this with the gap of digital connectivity? Because we are not really seeing each other. We are just seeing things which we want to show, or someone
Yeah.
wants to see us.
No,
Like
I
there are
think,
many memes nowadays कि
yeah.
ऊपर सूट पहना रहता है और नीचे पतलून में रहता है, तो
जी.
वो बंदा, तो it is just a physical part, but there is an emotional, there is a values part of it as well. We
थोड़ा
show good
judgmental
and
होता
behind it is back, but
है.
if I want to show जी जी जी, लेकिन whatever good values we think we possess or you possess, how do you pass it on by this acharya system? Because I believe it is much more practical than just giving a few instruction. Showing by own example is the best. Like I could learn so much about the values, the ethos, with your anecdotes and your example, real life examples of real life people. I could
जी.
learn how to pass it on in today's system.
You know, one is that, you know, whether you have a formal arrangement for that, you know. So there are two ways. One is the formal arrangement, the other is the informal arrangement. Formal arrangement in a school or college is becoming very difficult because, you know, there is so much of course load and all, you know, everybody is trying to see the courses are completed, you are put into placement. You know, one of the biggest challenges today I find is that education is not knowledge driven, but placement driven. You know, I see this very clearly that whenever I teach, I do find that whenever I am trying to delve a little deeper into things, students would say, "Sir, nahi, kam padhaiye, jo hai na, this is more than enough." So I don't feel bad about it, but I understand. But it certainly disappoints me because, you know, that we are not able to. So I understand the students' point of view because they are also burdened with so many classes and all. So we have to do it. We have to do it, and we have to all good people interact with them. And I have a feeling that if you do it time and again, it will have some good effects. There is no doubt about it. Absolutely no doubt. But it will not happen overnight. That's not possible. That's not.
Thank you, sir.
Professor Sushant Kumar, do you want to add something? Okay, sir. So thank you so much, sir, for such a powerful impact. It was really
Hello.
power in terms of. Yes,
Sushant,
Professor Sushant.
Sushant, you want to ask something?
Yeah. I'm Professor Naik from Maharashtra, Bharati Vidyapeeth University. Yes. Namaskar, sir. Sir, as Manas Misra said, I can give some, if you will permit me, so I can express my thoughts in this particular context. Yes, as he said, it is too difficult to control these situations. So the teacher wants to share something, what he has internally inbuilt qualities and what he has external experience he has gained. The problem is the external bodies. Hello.
Yes.
Am I audible, sir? Yeah.
You're audible, sir.
Yeah, yes. This is too difficult to capture nowadays because it is too difficult because we have a variations of student categories. First of all, the second thing is we have a digital platform that is a limit of media. So recently, I have done one 1.5 months course in Q Aspire in UK. That is related to the digital leadership certification. And these people, they used to say that we are just all Indian universities and institutions, what we are doing, we are decorating, we are just fabricating our system towards the digital platform. Actually, we don't have that level of a digital platform where student can interact or the faculty can interact with the students and they can impress the students by sharing their qualities. That's the problem. And if you will follow the traditional approach and with this particular current situations, it is too difficult to handle because the attitude, the perception, the whatever the thinking style, these are the things already has been changed during this different ups and downs in the environmental changes, and we have a different kind of atmosphere. So to control it, it's better to identify the specific group of students, those who can listen you, those who can actually they are intended to listen to your qualities of lectures. As Manas Misra said, it is rightly that we cannot control the students nowadays. To if you'll see the 100%, we can justify. So that's the things we have to see first as infrastructural facilities for digital platform, because we have only one option to conduct Zoom or Google Classroom. We have a limited scope, and we are thinking with a broad aspects.
Yeah.
It is too difficult, I think.
Yeah.
So this is exactly I wanted to share with you.
Very nice.
Yes.
See, I want to say at the end that you can, there are certain exogenous variables. There are certain things which are beyond your control. You know, what the HP platform shows and all, you have very little control over them, but you have complete control over yourself as a teacher
Yes.
and as a leader. So I am very, very strongly of the view that, you know, if you conduct yourself in a proper way, students find that, you know, you are serious about the work that you are doing. I think there would be a few students who would be very, very closely impacted by you. And also, it is a two-way traffic. You also need to understand the youngsters, their angst. You know, you cannot do think that you can give a top-down gyan. You know, whenever my son comes to my office, he writes on the whiteboard, Chief Gyan Officer, CGO, Chief Gyan Officer. But at the same time, whenever he writes something, you know, he sends it to me for my opinion. So though we are very, very friendly, he respects me, you know. So that is what is really required, you know. You can't have an open platform, but the relationship must be based on not only affection but also respect. And respect is not a one-way traffic, you know. I am very, very firmly convinced that it is not a one-way traffic. If you conduct in a manner which I find is very, very respectful, I should respect you. You know, our traditional concept that only teachers are a respected person, not students, that's the wrong thing. There are many students you find exceptional qualities about them, you know. So respect is a two-way process, and how you conduct yourself, how you come out as an individual without hypocrisy, I think is the challenge, is the real challenge. And as Denton Cooley, the great psychologist, has said, that you need to look at the mirror within you, and that mirror will tell you how you are doing. You don't have to look at a mirror outside to know how you're doing. All of us know. That looking glass self, we say, supposing at the end of this interaction, I know in my heart of hearts whether I have done well or I have completely failed. I know that you should be able to know that. But then you should try to improve. You know, it's not so failure should be a precursor to success. That's what I very strongly feel. But as long as it is well intentioned, it is fine. I know that you can fail. You know, that's not an issue. So thank you very much, friends, for your sharing your thoughts, and hopefully I meet you once again, either physically or through the digital platform. Hopefully physically.
Thank you, sir, for such a nice session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Be in touch. Just note down my mail ID.
Yes, I'm sharing in the chat box.
Please share my mail ID, MISRA, ma'am, Kavita ma'am, misra.sn54@gmail.com. And my cell number is 73811. So I don't pick up the phone. The only phone I pick up is from my wife to get a firing from her. So, but you can send me WhatsApp messages. Okay. So that is that. Very nice meeting all of you and getting the opportunity. Thank you, Professor Sikta, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir, for taking up the session and enlightening our audience. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you all.
Shikta ma'am, if you can share these mail ID and phone number on mail.
Sure, I am sharing.
Because in chat box it disappears once it is.
I am sharing in the WhatsApp group too.
Okay, no problem.
Please feel free to.
Yes, sir, we would like to, rather.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So with that, we come to an end to today's session. So tomorrow again, we'll have 3 more exciting sessions with 3 more eminent resources with us. So be with us till we meet next. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, madam. Have a great day.